Okay, so we've started, and let me just make a few opening remarks. Thank you for joining us today. I just wanted to say a few words of thanks first to our guest speaker, Danne Johnson. Danne is an attorney and professor of law at OCU with an extensive work in building diversity and inclusion and facilitating dialogues on race relations. And I also wanted to thank the Adult Ed Committee for making arrangements for this roundtable. Today, as we celebrate the World Communion Day and how Christ called us to embrace our shared humanity, we try to reach across boundaries and walls that have been created. One of the things that many of us experienced earlier this summer after our visit to the Greenwood district there in Tulsa. There were many discussions about the atrocities surrounding that event, the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. And a lot of those discussions kind of led the Adult Ed Committee to arrange for this important racial discussion this year around the fall roundtable. And so we asked, well, what are reparations? What exactly are they? And what are the best means for making reparations? And many other questions we've had. So today we're going to try to dive into that and ask some hard questions, as Danne asked us to do. The good weather aside, and try to delve into this. And so wanted to just start with Danne, and again, thank you for making the time for us and to help us along this journey. And I'll just let you go ahead and start. Are there any other questions from the group, the committee, anything to announce or that I may have missed? Okay. All right. Danne, I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. I want to thank you guys so much for inviting me. I appreciate your interest and your dedication. And I want to say perseverance in trying to explore such a difficult topic. I think reparations is a hard topic. Talking about race and other forms of discrimination, it's really difficult. So I applaud you just for even considering that you should, could, and would think about it. I think that's wonderful. And what brings me to this type of discussion and this work is that it is critically important because when I look at my kids, I want them to have a life where they can experience the fullness of what there is to offer. I want my children's only limitation to be based on their efforts. I don't want people to look at them and limit them because of how they look. And the same would be true if my child had a disability or if my child is a girl child. I don't want people just to look at my child without giving my child a chance to really, really shine. There are lots of ways to think about what is race in America and how we live it out. And what we're going to talk about today specifically is reparations. So I'm going to share some slides with you and we're going to talk and we're going to learn and we're going to grow. And as we do that, when you have questions, I just want you to go ahead and come off mute and stop me and ask the question, because that's how we can learn from each other. And there is almost, and I just say almost, no question that could get me out of sorts or make me feel all upset. I'm just not that kind of person. So, and I have also committed myself to answering the questions that you have. So what happens here is just us. It's just us. And we're just going to learn from one another because everybody has something to offer to the discussion and the contemplation from a personal experience, from our commitment as people of faith, as people who want to leave the world better than what we've encountered, right? I'll share this too at the outset. I too am United Methodist, and I'm a United Methodist person who owns a book of discipline, which really means you have gone too far into the faith, right? It just says something about the kind of person you are and what you were doing when you got the book of discipline in your house. because that's not every person who's a United Methodist. I have done work with the church before talking about race and have appeared in a variety of different places with the church. And I am happy to be here with you all today. I really am. So I'm going to share some slides and get us started. All right. It's always hypothetical when I say I'm going to share it because you just never know with technology. But it looks like I have succeeded for this moment. And so this is just the introduction. And if you have some paper and maybe a pen within your reach, I would encourage you to get that because we'll take a few little notes. Maybe something will be in your mind. I see that pen, Dee. I appreciate that, right? So, and as I talk, I'm always honest with everybody. I have my own pen and paper and I make notes on the questions that you ask, notes that come to my mind. And I say, Danne, you don't want to forget that. Because as some of you may be familiar with, as you age, you forget things. So I keep this pen on hand just in case I need it. What our goals are today, we're going to improve the ability to recognize the need for reparations. This is helpful to us when we engage with other people who want to know, what in the world are you talking about? Right? That'll be helpful to us. We're going to enhance our ability to discuss theories of reparations, and I'll present two different theories for reparations. And then we're going to engage in discussion about implementing reparations. If we were to go down that path, how might we get down that path? Today's agenda, we're going to warm up. We're going to discuss what's reparations and some next steps. I want to give us some ground rules. And people hate it when I say ground rules, but I'm a rules kind of person. I really like rules. And if we had all day, we would negotiate these rules, but we don't have all day. So I'm going to tell you some rules and hope that we can all abide by them. The very first one is to be fully present. I mentioned that because in this modern world, we do things like multitask. And the world I'm from, that really don't work well. It's hard to multitask. That's not easy. So I would ask us to be fully present. I want us to listen and listen and listen and listen in order to listen. Sometimes we listen in order to respond. But on this occasion, let's listen to understand, to be uncomfortable, and to know it's okay to be uncomfortable, because we're going to talk about things that we might have never talked about before. So it's all right to be uncomfortable. It's to be expected, to be open-minded, to be easy on the challenge of understanding, and difficult on the issues, not on the people. Don't be hard on the people. All right. We'll be hard on the issues. Let's be crisp and to the point. So if I have your agreement, can you just give me a hand, a thumbs up, a little sign? All right. All right. Good. So we'll move on. I want to tell you about self-care. As we talk about difficult things, sometimes we get all the young people say caught up in our feelings. And we don't want to get caught up in our feelings. So if we feel a little bit emotional as we talk, I want to give you permission just to take a breath and blow it out, just to settle your spirit and your soul and just relax. To know that everything you hear, you don't have to feel obliged to respond to it in this moment. That we're going to give each other some grace and some time. We're going to create space for us to really think about the things that we're talking about. This is our first exercise because, as I said, we're talking about things we may not have talked about before. So I need us to do a little stretch, right? If this was yoga, we'd raise our hands and move from side to side, but we're here in a virtual world. So I'm going to give you your first assignment. Can you write down these 9 little dots? That's the very first assignment. Copy what you see on the screen, 9 little dots. And your very first assignment is to connect these dots, all 9 of them, with 4 lines. Ooh. Connect the dots with 4 lines. And I'll give you 2 minutes to get that accomplished. And I have my little timer on my phone, and we're just going to work with that. If I had the Jeopardy music, I would be playing it, but I don't have that.
I assume you mean straight lines.
4 straight lines. We're going to connect all 9 dots. Don't give up. I see the face of defeat on here. Don't give up. You have about 30 more seconds. Make good use of those 30 seconds. You can do it.
It does connect. I'm not sure if
I'm looking at you. You got it? I see you looking at me. You got it?
that's-
No. No. All right, guys. That's my time. Telling us our time is up. All right. Did anyone get it?
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
I think-
Okay, wonderful. Can you tell us what you did? Tell us how you got it.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I kept thinking that the lines had to somehow connect to each other, but then if I did that, I wouldn't be able to do it. But then at the end, I just lifted my pen and put the fourth line down the middle, and that way, in other words,
So it's a Z with a line across it.
See with the line across. I understand that. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else get it? So I appreciate that effort in the Milton household. You guys get a gold star. It's fabulous, fabulous. I want us to think about it for a little bit. The point of this exercise is I need you to think outside of the box. And that's how we're going to think about reparations. So let's see. This is the solution if we don't lift our pens.
Oh, what?
Okay. We're going to start in the lower right-hand corner and draw a diagonal line up to the left hand. We start in the lower right-hand corner, move upward into the upper left-hand corner, move across to the right, beyond the dot,
Okay.
come down on an angle and go beyond the dot, and then go straight up.
It's just like this way.
Okay. Can you all see how that's working out? 4 lines connecting all 9 dots. Now, when people look at this, they're like, oh, Danne, you cheated. You cheated because you went outside the dots. But I didn't say you had to stay within the dots. Something happens to us, and when we look at those 9 dots, our mind makes a box. And then we feel constrained by the box. If you ask a young child to do this, they have a better chance of doing it. And sometimes young children, they just draw a big old circle with a crayon and connect all them dots, right? They'll figure out how to get it done. But for us, it's hard. It's really hard. Is there any one of us who thought they weren't going to start until they knew how to do it? Just the agonizing. I am not going to even begin this until I can see how it gets done. Anybody like that? Is there anybody who started it and then said, well, I'm going to try a second time. I'm going to keep trying till I get it. Tried a couple of times. Yeah. All right. So when we think about why 9 dots make a box to us, I want to suggest it's things like conditioning and socialization and those things that tell us we can't draw to where I have these 2 little question marks. I also want to tell you that these 2 little question marks represent all of the potential that's out there. That is the area of unexplored potential. It is the area of innovation and creativity that so often escapes us because of what we've been told, because of what we heard, because of how we think someone else might feel or respond to what we're doing. So as we talk about new ideas, about different things, I want us to consider, can we go outside the box? We say that all the time, think outside the box. But we need to recognize that there are things that push us into this box. We want to think outside the box today as we work together. So that's our little stretching exercise. I need us to free our minds and get out of these boxes that hold us in so we can think about innovation, maximum potential, and where we want to go. I sent some pre-work, but you all haven't had an opportunity to do it. So when you have an opportunity, I'm also going to send post-work. So you'll be able to do the pre-work as well as the post-work. It is important as we talk about change, culture, and race, that we have a sense of where we are in the dialogue. We can have lots of great intentions, but we need to know if we also have a little bit of bias. Sometimes when we have bias and good intentions, we don't go as far as we should. We don't consider all of the possible options. It is our biases that restrain us. We would need to be aware of those. And not that we can change anything on a dime, but our first tool is self-awareness. That's our very first tool as we try and do anything. And you might know that that's true if you've been in a loving relationship with anybody. Possessing self-awareness is so critical. If you want to begin a new journey, self-awareness is critical. And that's what we need, some self-awareness, right? This is our grounding scripture. It comes from Deuteronomy. And if thy brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let him go free from thee. And when thou sendest him out free from thee, thou shalt not let him go away empty. Thou shalt furnish him liberally out of thy flock and out of thy floor and out of thy winepress, of that wherewith the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, thou shalt give unto him. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in the land of Egypt, and the Lord thy God redeemed thee. Therefore, I command this thing today. That's Deuteronomy 15, 12 to 15. And I bring this up because the discussion of reparations is indeed a Christian imperative. It is indeed a Christian imperative. The way in which we have, as a collective, benefited from slavery, encouraged slavery, we as a collective have been implicit in this march. And as we consider that, we need to consider reparations. So I think it is completely appropriate for religious people, people who believe in God, and people of other faiths to really consider the case for reparations. I would also like to say that it is something that as white people need to consider it, right? So I think all of that works together as we talk about reparations. Where are we? Where do we want to be? And the why of consideration. I think if we look at Deuteronomy, certainly we didn't do as Deuteronomy would command us, right? When we decided that we would no longer enslave people. And if you look at slave systems throughout the world, different systems had different perspectives and goals. There are some South American systems of slavery, and their entire intention was to work a slave through their life to their death. And they gave little care for the reproduction of children. In the United States, it was quite different. We were invested in the reproduction of children through the slave system because it increased wealth. It increased workers. My mother has been doing our genealogy, and she had to stop. She stopped when she got to one of our forefathers. And there was an article in the newspaper about our forefather, and it says, "Man almost to his goal." So she reads the article, and it says that his goal is to have 100 children. So that's why my mother decided that doing any more research was too much, that she just could not bear that. She did not want to know of those things, right? So there are things like that that was part of our society and part of our ethos, who we were, what we privileged and what we celebrated. Those are things that we need to know. So as we talk about reparations, I want everybody to put on their leadership suit, because everybody here is a leader. We're leaders in our home, we're leaders in our church, we're leaders in all of the communities that we belong to. And as we are leaders, we need to be able to discuss these theories and all of the other things in life that makes the world a better place. And I want to say you all are empowered to do that because you are indeed leaders. We don't need to wait for fancy titles and things in order to lead. Everyone can lead right from where they are. Our objectives, we're going to talk about the recognition of the why behind reparations. We might talk about apologies. There are many places that do apologies as they relate to slavery and atrocities of the past. And then we'll talk about repair, which might be reparations. The first thing we're going to talk about is ways in which anti-Black racism can be seen. And I think it is good for us to consider how it can be seen in the past and whether or not in the present we can see the impact. So these are three different categories or three different things from the past. And I would suggest that each has left a lasting imprint, that we can see these things in who we are today. So let's consider them. If we had a big old large group, we could break up into rooms and everyone consider one at a time. But I think we could probably talk in this smaller group about each of these. The first is the science of the time, categorized people into four basic races, symbolized by four colors: red, black, yellow, and white. So this is historical. Do we see remnants of this in our present? So that's my question for you. And if you want to answer the question, you can do so through the chat, or you could just come off mute and tell me your thoughts about it.
So what time period are we talking about of the time?
Way back when, that time period, way back when we were categorizing people. Maybe it would be the time of Thomas Jefferson. In the time of Thomas Jefferson, categorization of people, places, and things, the lineage, Darwin's theory, and those types of things, how we think about people and science was just budding. And this might be the time where we decided we would do red, black, yellow, and white. And before that, we had these we were measuring skulls and looking at skin colors and making charts to tell us about each of these different groups. Do we see remnants of this today? Anybody?
Yes, we even have a song about it. About
what's the song, Kay?
All the children of the world. Red, yellow, black, and white. It's a part of that song. I know it was. I haven't heard it so much recently, but I've heard it somewhat soon. Not so far back.
I know that song, Kay. I know that song talking about all God's children, right?
Yes, and it was sung as something that was a positive, but it categorizes people and reinforces that way of looking at race.
Absolutely, absolutely. I see something from John. He says, we still see these categories in terms of diversity in university admissions. Yep. What else?
Do you think some of the categorization came during the time of when we started colonialization worldwide?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because as we are doing that, we need to come up with a rationale for why it's okay. And if we create this system that privileges the way I look, then people who look different than me, they shouldn't get all of the benefits. Right. That starts then, certainly. There is presently, when we talk about brown people, we know who we mean. We're talking about Hispanic people, for the most part, Latinx people, Chicana people, right? We have these ideas that colors are somehow related to people. In some ways, it serves to dehumanize people, to take us away from who they might be in terms of culture or ethnicity. It certainly takes them away from how they might identify. That's something for us to consider. So skin color is not a consistent predictor of racial groups. We can see different groups of people who seek to pass, to use their phenotype, the way they look, in order to gain all of the privileges and benefits of being white. So we see these systems still in play. What about the second one? White people were shown to be individualistic, highly valued in the colonies, while other groups were denigrated as communal. Do we see anything like this today? How can we see if there's an imprint or a remnant of this past?
Could you define what you mean by communal?
People who work together, people who wanted to live together. It is, in a sense, an othering. What comes to mind instantly is this idea that indigenous people, they hunted and worked together and they shared the benefit. They were viewed as communal people. If we look at Chinese immigrants who came to build railroads, one of the biggest outcries against that group was that they were communal. They lived with one another, with many people in one home, that they had many families together in one space. They were communal people. They shared with one another. So we have somehow privileged being a rugged individual, right? As opposed to a group of people who come together and unite and make sacrifices for one another. When we see communal people today, we want to say they are socialist. We say that they belong to cults. We do all kinds of things now when we see people who are living in a communal style as opposed to an individual style. Right? So we've overprivileged this sense of rugged individualism. And when we think about rugged individualism, that is the spirit that encourages conquest and domination, because it sets us up as my rugged individualism against you, right? I have to express my rugged individualism. That's a very American kind of thought. And we have privileged it as we think about the move westward. The move westward was about manifest destiny. God has reserved this land for us, and we are rugged individuals.
Also, we put those people in sort of ghettos and reservations and, a way to keep that group separate from the rest of us,
Absolutely, Stephanie. We have a name for every group of people. If you look at the concept that we have put Hispanic people in a place to live, it's the barrio. If we look at Asian people, no matter where they come from, we're going to call it Chinatown. Now, they didn't decide to live there. It was through segregation and the inability to live in other places.
Right.
Then we have the ghetto. That has become a word that we use for African-American people when they all live together. The reservation. And if we look at each of those terms, it is derogatory in nature. None of it comes with a fancy meaning. Now, if I want to find the word for when we have a whole bunch of white people living together, do we have a word for that?
Prosperity.
Prosperity. Might it be the suburbs?
Suburbia. Yeah.
Right? So we don't have a like word for that. Somehow we've missed that. and people might say trailer parks, but we have all people living in trailer parks, right? So we somehow have come up with these names. If we look at the origin of the word ghetto, we'll go back to Germany and think about the treatment of Jews.
Mhm.
Jews were locked behind a gate at night. That was a ghetto. They were not able to come out and to shop and to do the things that people would do. And now we use that same term to talk about African American people and where they are able to live. So I think that is curious for us to think about. Let me see. Flip side of this is referring to minority groups as having one characteristics. Absolutely. So the comment in the chat says all Asians are good at math. That's one example, instead of recognizing individual diversity within those communities. Absolutely. And particularly with Asians, we call that the model minority myth. That when I think of Asian people, I think, oh, probably good at math, probably great on the SAT. That creates a lot of problems because Asian individuals who are not good at math, they feel ashamed, they feel embarrassed. When Asian communities sense discrimination and injustice, they feel as though they shouldn't speak up because they're the good ones. And I think a lot of that has created this difficulty we have right now with respect to increased Asian hate, right? Lots of movements in that area. And we see lots of Asian activists, people who are still fighting for civil rights, now being able to raise their voice and be empowered. So all of those things happening. There's another thing that happens in particular with Asian groups as they live in this model minority group. It helps to divide them from other minority groups. So we use that model minority to fracture all minorities. So everyone has to stay in their own group and everyone feels like they have something to lose. It's difficult. What about number 3? This is particular to Norman, right? Norman, big sundown town.
Yep.
Sundown towns chase people of color out of certain towns. Redlining and inequitable mortgage availability made it impossible for many people of color to live in certain neighborhoods. Local ordinances forbade people of color from living in certain areas. My home that I live in now, built in 1927, right near the Capitol in Oklahoma City, I have a covenant in my deed that says if I sell my home to someone of African descent, the builder of the home and the founder of the neighborhood could come and take my home away.
Oh no.
So when I bought the home, because I'm a lawyer, I read all the documents. So when I got to that part, I had to call the realtor and I'm like, you know, I'm Black, right? I just need to be clear. We're not gonna have a problem, are we? And she assured me that we would not have a problem. So, you know, what else do we see with respect to having sundown towns? Historical? What's the lasting imprint of that? Anybody?
Well, there was the inclusion of African American students in the university for a long time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What else? Dee, I think you were going to say something.
No, same thing. I grew up in Midwest, rural Illinois, and the county seat was a sundown town for all groups. Primarily African Americans that was designated for, but there were no Asians staying around town either.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, when we think about sundown towns, redlining, and inequitable mortgages, it made home ownership difficult. You know, there were times where African Americans and other minorities could only get contract mortgages. They could not get regular bank mortgages, which made home ownership very difficult. We see now that we have minorities concentrated in cities, right? In urban areas, in areas that are densely populated. So I think that our history has a modern day impact. Here's another example. Our history is indeed our present. Not too long ago, Wells Fargo was caught in a huge scandal about race, where they had certain banking items that they declared were ghetto items. And they targeted minority populations, and they called those people mud people.
Oh,
And this is in their documentation. So this is not some ancient thing that we are discussing. This is modern. In 2001, there was a study done by the Associated Press. They did a 3-part investigation about all of the land that had been taken from African Americans under trickery and sometimes just by theft. That has a huge lasting impact because people who had land, they no longer possess that land. And we see now that there are certain places making up for that. In California, just recently, there was a parcel of land that's a beach given back to an African-American family that it was taken from. So we can see stories like that that still occur. And I think the Associated Press looked at 406 victims who lost 24,000 acres of land based on race through trickery and theft. That's devastating. Imagine the individuals who lost that land, what life could be like now. Some of the things the land is being used for now: a country club in Virginia, oiled fields in Mississippi, and a spring training facility in Florida. Those are all on stolen land.
wow.
But we don't think about that. But surely that's a modern impact. I think there's something in the chat. Let me check it. Impact of limiting or eliminating generational wealth for minority populations. Absolutely, Kay. That is what happens. That's what happens when we can't get this. If you'd like to read more, there is this really good book by Isabel Wilkerson, The Warmth of Other Suns. You might check that out. And she has another one, Caste. Those are good books to consider when considering race and how this all works. Other things that we see, the deprivation of education. When we think about poor school and poor education, it's in urban communities, most often populated by minority groups. During this historical time, we think of the imprint that's left. We can think about things like terrorism, domestic terrorism. We as a community have allowed people to be terrorized, and we haven't done enough to support people against terrorism. We have had many generations of people who really live in an unprotected status. They can't be sure to be protected by those who are supposed to protect them. There's been housing discrimination, the GI Bill, and all of these things have not been applied in a fair way. So these are all of the things that have this lasting impact, this lasting thumbprint. So when we talk about what's going on, it's not just history, it is also today. These things should concern us. And as we learn history of different people, rarely do we learn about resistance. So we kind of get to feel like they understood this, they accepted it, and it was all okay. But if we delve into this, there are many stories of resistance. They're important for us to know, right? So as I talk about history and historical life and those things, there are a couple of things that I want to point out. Let me see. Let me get back to the slides. Yep. Okay. So in terms of history, there are a couple of things. We have this oppressed economic opportunity. And today we can see disparities in economic wealth, right? Where people are based on race and wealth and education, health outcomes, policing, and in many different aspects of life. If we look at those things, we can trace them back. We can think about experiments done for medical testing, often on minority bodies. If we think about the ways in which we developed gynecology, often on minority bodies. If you think about the Miranda warnings and the development of the law, often on minority bodies. That's something to be considered, all right? So when we have all of these things, right, we can have this recognition of all of these negative outcomes that come because of race, because of slavery, because of all of this unanswered oppression. And often we see apologies. In recent times, there have been many apologies for enslavement. There's been acknowledgement of how different institutions and individuals have been engaged with slave populations in the past. And in many spaces, there's lamentation, right? I'm going to lament this situation. But a question that we should consider is that enough or is more needed? When we think about the disparities that we've discussed, I would suggest more is needed beyond the recognition of past wrongs, beyond the apology and the lamentation. That's when we think about reparations. So just in terms of history, in 1619, slaves, indentured servants, they could live and love one another. They could work together. That's 1619. And then we move forward from there. 1860, the value of slaves was estimated to be $3 billion. That would be the value of the bodies that are enslaved. I think it is estimated that the cotton production in the South was valued at $250 million. If we think about those huge numbers, that concentration of wealth was higher than in any other industry in the United States. I think there is information that in 1860, there were more millionaires per capita in the Mississippi Valley than any place else in the United States. All of that tells us about this huge economic power that slavery was. And that's really the foundation of the national economy. Without that huge amount of wealth and production, free labor, we wouldn't be perhaps we'd be exactly where we are today, but we wouldn't have had that foundational money to get us there. We'd have to have come to this place in some other way. It's hard to imagine what that is. It's hard to imagine that we don't all owe a great debt to the horrific institution and the wealth that was produced. It is really disingenuous to disconnect ourselves from that. Just give that some consideration. Anybody have thoughts, concerns, comments? Anybody?
I suppose,
Go ahead.
I just was going to say that we had a speaker at our Rotary Club did a very powerful presentation on the massacre in Tulsa.
Yes.
And just at the end, we were asking questions about reparations, and I was talking to one of the people there, and I was very emotionally stirred up, but he said, well, other countries had slavery, as if that absolves everybody for all these crimes. Other countries had slavery. Does that make it okay that our nation has been built on the basis of this brutality? And I just was like, I barely could know how to proceed from that.
Right. It's really hard. It's really hard because as we think of reparations, there are lots of arguments against reparations. Many people had slavery. Another great argument is the debt is even because these people were brought out of savage environments and have been civilized. And they benefit. I don't want to make you upset, Ms. Milton, but that's what people say.
That's what people
right?
say.
That is what people say. They say the debt is clear. It has been cleaned. And I just don't think that could be the case, right? So I'm of the same school as you. I want to also, it would be bad for me to talk to this group of United Methodist people without bringing up John Wesley. Right now, in 1773, John Wesley published a little pamphlet called Thoughts on Slavery. And we know that he was an opponent of slavery. As a group of faith, we have to be thoughtful. We have to be reflective of the words of John Wesley. 6 days before he passed away, he wrote to William Wilberforce, I believe, who was in Britain. And he talked about moving from slavery and working to erase that horrible stain from America. 6 days before he died. In 1790, 20% of Methodists were Black, enslaved and formerly enslaved. Many of us can look at our own United Methodist communities and realize that's not the case. In 1794, we see fractures in the Methodist faith because of segregation.
Right.
There are many who were enslaved and formerly enslaved who felt as though they shouldn't be segregated within the church. And so they left to find and found their own institutions. It is not hidden in our history. We can find that in our history, and we should be responding to that. Okay, let's see. So we see this separation happening in 1794. That's a long time ago, right? We go from a place in 1790 where 20% of our congregants were African American to places where we are now. If we look at the United Methodist Church in Oklahoma, we have a hard time. We have a hard time finding African American congregants. And African American churches do not survive at the same rate. If we look at the pipeline in seminary, we're not doing so great. I think we have to think about that and what does it mean and where are we trying to go with all of this? So as we give this some consideration, I've got something else in the chat. Jamar Tisby has written 2 books. Yep, The Color of Compromise and How to Fight Racism. These books helped me begin to understand the issues of reparations. I strongly recommend them. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, because that's what's important. We've got to share the resources that help us really consider these issues, because it's not obvious to everybody that it's an issue, because we have this rugged, individualized American identity. We still find people saying things about, if you work harder, it could be better. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We still see people and hear people who say these things without really acknowledging how difficult we have made life for many people based on nothing more than skin color. We don't want to give recognition to that, and we must. If we're trying to be an honest people, if we're trying to deal with our motivating scripture, if we're trying to follow the call of John Wesley as the people who are United Methodists, we can't ignore those things. So after thinking of apology, this becomes the whole big question. Is it possible to create some kind of wholeness? Is it possible to repair this? And the thing that we're trying to repair would be 250 years of slavery, followed by 90 years of Jim Crow, followed by 60 years of separate but equal, and 35 years of racist housing policy. Individually and collectively, that seems insurmountable. That's a lot. That's really a lot. So I want to suggest that it's going to take all of us to put our energy and our minds on what our goal is. It's going to take all of us to figure out the smallest of things that we can do, all the way up through the largest of things that we can do. It is up to us as individuals and as communities and as faith communities. We just need to get it all together, right? It's up to us to drive this train and to push the barrel and to put our hand to the plow so we can figure out how to get this accomplished. And I just share with you, there are many people who don't want to do that kind of work. There are many people who hope against hope that it's all going to work out. That if we're just a little bit patient, things are going to shake out in the wash. That everybody magically is going to get better. Right? I want to suggest we got to do a little bit more than hope. We got to put our prayers and our hopes into our work and our deeds, into our ethos and our words. We got to be able to talk about all of this. So beyond recognizing the harm and the atrocities of the past and apologizing, we're going to have to do something to try and get to repair and wholeness. If we want to talk about understanding reparations, we'll talk about two different ideas. The first thing I'm going to tell you is that the battle for reparations is not new. This is not some new thing, Johnny come lately, it's just come along. It has been here for a very long time. And we'll talk about some traction about reparations in 1783, right? Long time ago, and what happened then. But before we do that, I want to deal with this question here. The big question to me, the big elephant in the room is, won't reparations just divide us? Won't it divide us even more than we are? And I want to suggest that's not possible. We pretty much are divided, right? We pretty much are fighting and scrapping for one little piece of pie all the time.
Yeah.
We pretty much are disagreeing on things along racial lines. So it is difficult for me to imagine that we could be further divided. I know that it is possible, but I want to think the chances that we become more divided are no greater than the chances that this discussion could make us more united. If we have all decided we're going to work together with a common goal in mind, what is more unifying than that? And it is not this idea, right? People feel quite often that reparations is not appropriate because I am not personally guilty of anything. I am a good person. And I want to suggest that's the wrong lens. It is not the lens about I. It is this question instead. Reparations can be clarified or simplified in this way. The question would be, what can this generation do to repair the damages that was caused by a previous generation? What can this generation do to repair the damages that were caused by a previous generation? And we may not be individually guilty, but we are all responsible for the solution. We are all going to work toward the solution as a generation. So I think it's about how we shift and change the question that could benefit this march toward reparations. It's the why. It's not about you. It's about how do we as a people heal from the wrongs of the past. That's where we need to go. That's what we need to be thinking about. That's, of course, that's my opinion, but I'm happy to share it with y'all. So that's what I'm thinking about. All right. That's the why. And there's another point. I think there are many people who feel as though they have been treated unfairly. They've been given a bad shake, that they are in need now. And to talk about reparations is not the right time. I accept that. There are lots of people who have been disenfranchised and treated poorly in the United States. There are many poor white people who are struggling. So the question is, can we work on that too? Not instead of reparations. Can we work to have a just system where people can be educated? Can we work to have a just system where people receive medical treatment? I think the answer is yes. That does not mean we don't work on reparations. Ms. Roberson, I see your hand is up. Talk to us.
Okay, I'm thinking one of the things that I think is when people say the word reparations, a lot of times all people hear is money. We're going to pay thousands of millions of dollars to people who have been oppressed and mistreated. As I understood from Mr. Tisby's book too, though, it's not that that's not an option, but working for voting rights, working for immigration reform, working for criminal justice, all of those systemic issues to me are a part of reparations and more. There's many more. But I think sometimes when people hear, maybe not this group, but people out in other parts of the world hear reparations, all they see are dollar signs. And for some reason we all want power and money, I guess. But I'd like to hear you speak to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to tell you right now, I think that when we do say reparations, people do see dancing dollar signs. And I would suggest that's very curious. Isn't that effective in ending the conversation? Somehow that has become the prevailing thing that people are concerned about. But there are many other things we do in this nation that cost money, and we don't seem to rail against it, such as going to Mars. That costs a whole lot of money, but I don't see people protesting against going to Mars. But somehow we are all in a big bunch about the possibility of using money to redress the wrongs of the past. So I would ask that we just know that that is not the only option. But I also would suggest if we live in a situation where the average net income of a white family is 10 times the net income of the same education level Black family, that's a problem. And if it is related to generational wealth, that's a problem. So I don't want us to turn away from the conversation of reparations because it might relate to money, because it very well might. But we could also think about reparations in a number of other ways. So I'd like us to remain open to that possibility. When we say we want to do amazing things in this nation, there was nothing crazier when Kennedy said, we are going to the moon. There was nothing crazier that had been uttered from the mouth of man that didn't stop us from going. Right? I think first we have to determine if we want to do it, and then we can determine all of the processes, all of the way. And, right now there's a bill, HR 40, which has almost no chance of passing. I think right now, if you look at GovTrack, it says there's a 4% chance of passing. It is HR 40, and it is a bill to research reparations. It is not a bill to pay reparations. It's a bill to research whether or not they are necessary. But it has almost no chance of passing, according to all predictions, because we don't really want to talk about it. We don't really want to know about it. So it's very easy for us to talk about why it couldn't work. But it's kind of like people use this. It's kind of like creating a boogeyman. It's going to be scary. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be worst thing ever. But we need to really talk about what it could be like. So I hope that helps to answer that, share my thoughts about the dancing dollar signs, because I think that is how people feel.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Let me see something else. In the chat, the 2000 Tulsa Race Massacre Commission called for 5 components of reparations: cash, memorials, economic legislation to develop assets for the future. Absolutely. So not just money. Another comment, don't we also have a responsibility to rectify continued injustices, even if we didn't start or cause them? Absolutely, we do. Absolutely. Okay, let me see what else I can share with you guys. So 1783 is when I told you we talked something about reparations. There's this freed woman, Belinda Royal. And Belinda Royal, she was abducted and became a slave at age 12. So she was enslaved. Eventually, the slave owner they pass away and she's inherited by the son. The son runs away during the war, and she and her daughter petition the court for a pension for a former slave. And she won. That's the beginning. That's a part where we think that somebody in the government values the work that she has done. So it goes on from there. People talking about reparations. In the Quaker church, if you wanted to be a Quaker in good standing, you had to provide for everybody that you had enslaved. You had to give them land and money and things like that. Quakers in New York. And the person who's done the research on that is Roy Finkenbein. He's created all of this research. I see a hand. Mr. Smith, what do you got?
I just want to point out we generally stop at 5:30. So we have
Absolutely.
about 20 minutes. So I just wanted to kind of draw your focus to that so we can just as a matter of point. So you were doing great.
I appreciate it.
This is great
I
stuff.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. This here is a list of people who have pushed the reparations talk along. And the response has been just as we've already talked about it. We taught slave languages, Christianity, and civilization. We're good. We are good with this, right? When we look at reparations in the field, we have a whole bunch of things to consider. West Germany and Israel, interned Japanese here in the United States. 2015, a reparation bill to cover African Americans from 1970 to 1990 for torture. $5 million, an apology, an acknowledgement, a memorial, and an education fund. Georgetown, a vote of students recently, they voted to come up with a fund funded at the amount of $400,000 annually to support the descendants of slaves that were used by Georgetown University in the 1830s. Wow. If we look at nuns in Louisiana, 2018, they realized that they had sold slaves in order to keep the convent going. They have come up with a fund. I believe that nunnery owned dozens of slaves throughout the slave period. Episcopalian Seminary in Virginia, they've come up with reparations. Presbyterian Princeton Theological Seminary, they've done confession and repentance. They too have a reparations fund. There are lots of groups that are working on this, particularly religious organizations. Two models for reparations. One is atonement, one is transformation. Atonement does a lot of wonderful things, but the very last point is that it does not necessarily address the social structures that produce and maintain racism. And that's what we want to do. We want to address the social structure. That might lead us toward transformation. Transformation as a model of reparations will work on restructuring unequal relationships of power. That's really at the heart of what we want to talk about. Working on unequal relationships of power. What are the next steps? Where could we go from here? Here's a list of perhaps, and then we're going to do some brainstorming together. Maybe you see something you like, maybe you don't. So perhaps majority white congregations might make donations to support neighboring Black religious communities. Maybe we want to consider how to make amends through financial investments in long-term programs benefiting African Americans. Maybe we would consider committing a portion of unrestricted endowment to help create a center for racial reconciliation. Perhaps we do our own research and tell stories that we don't know about our relationship to these events of the past. Perhaps we come up with scholarships for students attending seminaries or historically Black colleges. Maybe that makes things more equal. Maybe it empowers people. Perhaps we finance programs supporting Black students, nursing home residents, small business owners, and others. These are just suggestions that other places are trying, something that could fit. But I want you to consider this idea. This is something else that people are doing. They are taking collections within the church and then making special offerings and donations. And I need us to be careful. I don't want to be critical of anyone, but I need us to consider, does that effort help to realign power structures? Because that's what we need to do. We want to realign power structures. We want to be sure to empower other people. We want to share power. That's what we'd like to do. And I'm saying we in the big we. That's what I'm thinking of doing. Let me just leave that. You all might think of other things, and that's where we need to get. So perhaps we want to go around or jot some notes about what you think when you think of reparations, what you think about could be some next steps in considering reparations. Now, I don't want to call on you, but, I think Mrs. Smith wants me to call on you, and I'm happy to do that bidding. See how I threw that right at you? Anybody? You just come off mute and tell me what you think. While I'm waiting for you, I want to give you this thought. I want to give you the thought that really we are called to commit and recommit to our baptismal words. We want to resist evil, injustice, and oppression. Those are the words that should be written on our heart from our baptismal. So I just tell you, that's what we're supposed to be working on. Now, we've been working on a lot of other stuff, but that's what we're supposed to be working on. So with that in mind, does anyone have anything? Want to share anything?
I would like to share something.
Yes.
I have found that the organization of getting people to give on a regular basis, that if the church has a regular event, like a fundraiser or a regular designation toward helping African American communities, then I think a more effective relationships can be built from that. For example, find out which church community or you said a Black community you would be helping. You find out what they need, and then the money can be put to that. On the other hand, changing systemic systems, I mean, just all of these atrocious alterations to voting laws, I think that's a very serious area that needs to be addressed, and that requires getting the vote out and doing all we can with that. I mean, and it's just extreme. To me, it's extreme.
I agree. Thank you for sharing. In the chat, Kim Oliver has, thinking of Greenwood in particular, has there been a needs assessment to help determine desired or needed reparations for that community? I think the answer is no. Not an assessment that goes into how we share power. So there's been assessments done with what would be the right memorial, what would be a proper recognition, but not really addressing moving forward and changing the power dynamic.
I would just think that the people who are affected are the ones who should be letting us know what they need, rather than me as a white person saying, oh, here, this is going to make it better, you know.
I agree completely. I agree completely, because it's a different attitude when I think I'm doing something for Kim versus I'm partnering with Kim.
Mhm.
If I'm your partner, our relationship is much more impactful for both of us than if I just decide, well, Kim needs tickets to the ballet. That's going to make her life better. Right? That's not quite the same. It's not quite the same. Right? So I think we do need partnership opportunities. There are many things that we can look at and assume that we know the answer to. But I think we do need partnership so we can understand real issues and real solutions. When we work in a partnership, that's sharing power, right? I'm not being of service to anybody. I'm partnering with somebody so that we can create solutions. We are working with one another. That's the sharing of power. How do I invite people in to share this power? Anyone else?
I think it sometimes, oh, I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, I worked in nonprofits for a long time, and we worked hard not to use a charity model all the time, which is what you're talking about when we just give instead of a collaboration, cooperation model.
Yeah.
And some people it's like an easy way to get rid of your guilt if you just pass around some money. And so it's much, much harder to do the collaboration. But most of our systems are set up, many of our systems that collect money to be of use in the world are charity models.
Yep. Yep. I think that's right. John, what you got?
Well, so I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think, clearly there's a need to acknowledge and educate people about the injustices of the past and how that affects the reality of today. I'm a little bit pessimistic about the ability to do that without dividing people and pushing people away. But I think it's really necessary to do that. And I like the idea of, where possible, and this gets into the whole sort of consequential damages concept in the law, being able to say, this act led directly to this injustice, and we can, sort of compensate for that, right? So I like the idea of doing that in very specific ways where we can do that.
Yes.
But after, as you say, after 250 years of all this and more, a lot of times it's hard to do that, because you've had, generation after generation of land transfer and all this kind of stuff. So it gets complicated, right? One of the things that one of the things that I sort of like as a concept is something that maybe deals with the need to do this, but also do it across the board, and also what you mentioned for poor whites and everybody. And one way I look at it is, I feel like we need to make our country stronger as a whole. And I like the idea of sort of looking at, and maybe this is kind of in line with what you said about going to Mars. It's sort of saying, as a national goal, we want to be the strongest country we can be. And the way we do that is by empowering all of our citizens to be the best they can be. And so whether that means giving people the education or the job skills, giving people the smarts to do smart things. It addresses food quality, it addresses obesity, it addresses all the things that make our society weaker, and in a way that doesn't single out individuals. It's sort of like when you talk about, hey, we're a football team and we need to get fit so we can have a winning season. Nobody says, well, Joe over here is really fat, we need to dump him, or he's a bad guy because he's out of shape. No, everybody says, let's all do the push-ups and get in shape, right? So it strikes me as sort of if you kind of look at it like that, it's more of an aspirational model, and it gives people what they need without going into some of the problematic areas. And I'm wondering if you think that could work, or if that's not enough.
So I think that's not enough. And I'll tell you why. I think that all boats don't rise and fall in the same tide. right? Because if my boat have many more bricks in it holding me down, eventually it's going to capsize and some boats will be left afloat, right? So when we say things like the economy's been bad, it's been bad for everybody equally. It has been bad for everybody, but the people who will emerge are middle-class people, upper middle-class people. We're never, ever going to spend any time discussing how poverty is worse, right? Because the poor is the poor. If once you're poor, you don't get more poor. So we still going to have poor people who are poor, and the middle class and upper middle class will rise. But we don't notice the disparity. So the disparity will still be there, right? So even though we'll come up with great programs like the GI Bill, great program, huge racial disparity in the application. So we need to really figure out how do we fix for this, and that this is all of the discrimination compounded over years. So we can't fix for everything. So I would think that as a group, it'd be great if we could have one more, come up with some objectives. These are the things that we're going to work on. And we might not be able to work on everything. And we might also determine that working locally is how we ought to get this done. That we are going to work locally. We're going to support some national things, but we're going to work locally. And as we think globally and work locally, what are our objectives? If we look around at maybe it's compelling to somebody that we discriminated against United Methodist practitioners, parishioners, and there is a failing United Methodist Church that can't meet their apportionments. Is there something we can do to help that church? Is there some partnership that we can create? Is there some effort that we could make? If we look at African-American seminary students, like we have the St. Paul School of Religion on the campus of Oklahoma City University, the St. Paul School of Religion, maybe they don't have a good pipeline of students. Maybe their minority students aren't doing as well, don't stay and finish the program. Maybe those students don't have great internships and placements. Maybe that's something we could do, right? So maybe that's what's compelling to the group. But that's what we got to first, I think, figure out. So I think we can't lose sight of what we're trying to do reparations for. I think we have great reasons as to why. But if we think of, I'm going to cast a broad net and help everybody, that won't recomp for the past. Mm-hmm. So I think we are going to have to really bite the bullet and say what we mean and mean what we say. And then we might come up with another partner program to help all people have food. That's not beyond us. So as we think about what we can do, I think it's really important that we sit down and come up with all the list of things I would want to work on. And then from there, without regard to money or expertise, and then from there, with the list of all possibilities, whittle it down to the 3 things we really want to explore. These are our 3 objectives. But we want to start from a very broad and big place so that everybody can put their ideas out on the table. And then we're going to pick some things. Once we pick some things, we're going to figure out how often we're going to meet to talk about it. Who should be in these meetings? Kim talked about sharing partnership. When we have these meetings, is it just us? And when I mean just us, is it just us here on the call? Or are we going to invite people who really haven't given much thought to this? Right? Are we going to require that people get some kind of training when we talk about this? Who are we having? And what are those people like? Have they experienced any of this? Have they heard any of this talk? Do they need to read a book first? Who are the people? And how do we plan this out? When we talk about a plan and next steps, we want to know, are we working with special interest groups? Are we working with groups that look like us? Who's going to be the leader? How are we going to make decisions? But the very first step is to coming up with ideas and some objectives. Okay.
I wonder if there's I think in Oklahoma City, there may be a Black business association. And I'm not sure if there's anything like that in Norman. And but if we could encourage some sort of coalition of Black organizations that we might be able to fund in Norman. I often walk the neighborhoods around Norman, and I just wonder why I don't have Black friends walking in the streets of Norman. And we're an inclusive city as a rule, more so in St. Stephen's. And I just wonder what it is that we could do that would, attract that, where we can have relationships, and the more we build relationships, then they could help drive what those, reparations, however you want to look at it, those relationships over time. And of course, we've talked about making a fund for scholarships or a fund for this, that, and the other, and that's money. So those are some objectives. But I would offer, how can we do things that would attract, whether it be Black business, Black organizations, Black, build up a Black community where we can have a relationship with them. We've talked about churches in the past, joining with St. Stephen's and another Black church. And, so I just trying to think of how we can partner with other organizations that are Black, or somehow encourage the development of that.
I love that energy. I think one of the things that we have to think about is this is something that you all desire. You have to go out and get it, right? So I think we need to find communities and go out and be there and participate. There is one of the very few minority-owned bookstores in the Northeast quadrant of Oklahoma City. And we could buy our books from that bookstore. We could go, there's a brand new wine bar, Northeast 23rd. You could go to that community and have a glass of wine. But it's about us involving ourselves so that we could be available for those relationships. That is not easy if we are in a homogeneous community.
Right.
And we hope somehow that we could develop those relationships. It is unlikely. And that's what segregation does. It forces us to be with similar people, and we don't have many opportunities to get out. Now, there is a big event that'll come up soon, the Martin Luther King prayer, vigil, and breakfast. Every year that happens. And every year that is a time where churches and a diverse group of people get together and they go and they listen to a speaker and they do a little march in Oklahoma City. That might be a great opportunity to connect with other groups. And we just have to be available to meet more people. But if we don't move around, it really can't happen. It really can't happen. And when we go to meet new people, we got to go ahead and engage those new people. That's what we got to do to make new friends, to develop new communities, to work with different people. My single girlfriends, I tell them, you ain't gonna meet your husband waiting on the mailman because ain't nobody coming to your house. You got to get out. You got to get out and move around. It's the same thing here. The people who we want to connect with, they're not coming to us. We got to get out. We got to move around. We got to be available. What else?
Danne, are these slides available to us?
I will make them available to you. I'll send them to you. I'm going to send you 3 things. I'll send the pre-work again, all slides, and then I'll send some post-work.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think just looking at this last slide is a great slide for us to really think about where we go from here.
Yeah. And that's what we got to be thinking about. And it's not easy. It's not easy having a conversation about race, and we want to do it just right. But sometimes there's not a just right. And the truth is, even as we sit here today, everybody's not happy. So if we do a change, everybody's not going to be happy then either. Right? So we got to be motivated by what's right. Keep that in the forefront. What's right? What is our goal? What's our objective? What are we trying to do? Okay. What else can I share with you? Are there questions? Anybody? No?
Have you created a slide of things one could say to someone who's not in favor of reparations? There's like key words or key sentences or that can be there when you need it, when you're trying to push back against racist attitudes.
I have not, but Miss Milton, for you, I will. I will send that along in 2 days, okay? I want you to have all the tools you need so that you can have a wonderful discussion about this. And, if I could, I'd make it small so you carry it in your wallet. But the truth is, for me, I wouldn't be able to read it if I pulled something out of my wallet. I'd have to get the wallet and the glasses and the card, and then I'm going to drop it. So it's going to be a full sheet of paper. But I'm going to come up with some responses for you.
I will treasure that. Thank you.
All right. Yes.
Also,
Anyone
I want to
else?
ask if are there other churches that you know of that are asking these questions that we might be able to partner with them and trying to struggle through these questions together?
I do think that there is a church that is interested, but I don't, everyone who says they are interested may not be really interested. So let me check this one church I'm thinking of out, and I will send you their information one way or another, regardless of what I find. I will send you their information because it could be that they just have not made movement because they don't have a partner. So sometimes it's easier to move when we have a partner. But so I believe there is a church that I can think of right off the top of my head. So I'll give you that information.
I know that when we toured the Greenwood district, our tour guide, and I'm going to draw a blank on her name, Mary, but she was a former pastor of St. Paul's in Tulsa, and they had chosen to take up a tithing periodically throughout the year to go toward I believe it was a food bank in the Greenwood district, like that. But that's a Tulsa. And if there's a church closer to us where we could travel when we can travel again, then that might be just a way of partnering with someone. But
absolutely. Partnerships make things easier in a way because we can learn from their experiences and their thought process, and they can encourage us and we can encourage them. So partnerships are beautiful. Anyone else? Questions? Concerns? What did I miss?
I know some of the concerns have been, that we can't make anything happen because the country is so divided. But I think we've been kind of veering toward, then let's try to do something from our church. What I've sensed in recent months, that's where we're kind of leaning toward something like that. So I think this is a great discussion to lead us into that.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Danne.
Thank you, guys.
Yes.
I totally appreciate you guys, the energy, the effort, the thought. You should be applauded. You should be feeling like you're making some movement, because there are lots of people who think about these issues just for a millisecond and then they move on. And you guys have decided to think about it, talk about it, think about it some more. It's a wonderful place to be, a wonderful beginning.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'll also share Danne's contact information. So if anybody wants to contact her separately, then you're certainly welcome to do that. And then And then join the Adult Education Committee as we grapple with the results of this today and try to figure out what are some good next steps for St. Stephen's. And I know that Danne's offered to just be a listening ear if we have some follow-up questions. So I really appreciate your time, Danne. I know it's really valuable, and you're trying to make your professor, you're an attorney, you've got this hour work program going, so you are a busy woman. And
but this is as important as anything else.
Yeah.
So I thank you guys. I'm going to sign off.
Okay, thank
Bye-bye.
you guys. Have a good evening,
Thank
rest
you very
of you.
much.
All right, bye-bye. Okay, let's stop the recording.